Hi, everybody, Entrepreneur Plus members. I am Frances. I am the deputy editor of Entrepreneur Magazine. And today we are going to have I'm sure, very fun and interesting conversation with Gabrielle Judge, aka the Anti Work Girlboss. She is also, gotten a lot of attention for her lazy girl jobs ethos. And she's a content educator and also an exclusive writer for Entrepreneur Plus. Gabrielle is the visionary CEO and content creator behind Anti Work Girlboss. Like I said, she leads a social revolution reshaping the future workplace landscape. Her pioneering concept of the lazy girl job has captivated millions monthly, offering both relatable content and career inspiration. Her areas of expertise extend across work-life balance, branding for Gen Z employees, and forward-thinking perspectives on the future of work. Esteemed platforms like NPR, BBC, and TEDx have recognized her innovative contributions, inviting her to speak on her insights, and Gabrielle's groundbreaking ideas have also been spotlighted in over 10,000 global publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Al Jazeera, and 60 Minutes Australia, underscoring her influential role in redefining career norms. And of course, she is also a writer for us, which we are very happy about. So and the specifics of this conversation are going to be about what to do when your job won't pay you more. A lot of us are maybe, stuck in jobs it doesn't feel that easy to get out of. So she's going to give us some, good solutions for how to work around that and not feel hopeless. Also, if you are not yet a subscriber to Entrepreneur Plus, you're going to want to take advantage of this exclusive offer. Get your first month free with the code ONEFREE. That's in capital letters, FREE. You can click on the link in the chat or visit entrepreneur.com to subscribe now. And as a subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive tips and strategies from Gabrielle Judge and many of our other experts. Plus, you'll unlock all member benefits, which includes access to our premium stories, 1-year magazine subscription, so you can read fun things by me, and video content guides and advanced business strategies, no ads, and free ebooks, discounts, and more. Subscribe now, again, with the code ONEFREE, capital FREE. And so now we will welcome Gabrielle.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of wanted to start, we're talking about this. I feel like we should start with the basics for people who don't know you a little bit. I think that maybe you could just talk a little bit about the concept of the lazy girl job. I think I wanted to start with dispelling this idea that, you're not telling people not to do a good job at work or that they shouldn't have to work to make money or, anything like that. I think older generations probably get a little bit triggered by that. And you've experienced that in your own interactions with, the media and stuff. So it's maybe there's this attitude of but I had to work hard. Why don't they? So I wondered if you could just talk about the big picture of what younger generations are experiencing that may be different than what older generations are, sort of how that's driving this trend, and also just generally how you think about, the lazy girl job.
Look, I want to be super, super clear. I do love to work. I work a lot, and I do think that work is super, super important. So I definitely appreciate how you've brought up that this is absolutely no conversation about being a complete jerk at work, not helping out, not doing your job, expecting to just literally do nothing and somehow you make money in your sleep. Like that's a huge, huge lore that we've heard online, and it tends to lead us the wrong way. So me, huge workaholic, like I've always dealt with that ever since I was a little kid. And I think our entire culture has a little bit of that. I think that we're a very work centric culture. And so while that can be awesome, that can be fulfilling, I think that the pendulum has swung a little too far into the overworking. And we're looking at corporate America today, especially in this post-pandemic world, and it just doesn't look the same as the 70s. Like the earning potential may be a little bit different, and we may need to play the game with different rules. It's a completely different landscape. And so when I talked about lazy girl jobs, I started that trend last summer, which is crazy to think about. And what was going super viral on TikTok was like lazy girl dinner ideas, lazy girl workout routines, etc. And basically the whole premise of this zeitgeist was doing something, accomplishing something well, but in an efficient amount of time. And so I looked at that and I was like, why are we not talking about our careers? Like, I love this. So that's where Lazy Girl Jobs was born. And so from there, when I said it, the video went viral and I was like, okay, like it performed well. I didn't realize that it was going to make the impact that it did across the world. And so what Lazy Girl Jobs is really about is just normalizing a conversation about work-life balance and incorporating that into your career decisions. So typically we're encouraged, to take on more work, make sure that we're always learning something, make sure that we're always staying busy, climbing the corporate ladder one rung at a time every year, making sure we get that promotion. And while those success indicators are great, there's also room for a conversation on, hey, like, how do I feel at my job? Like, is my nervous system okay? Do I actually enjoy what I'm doing? Do I feel like I am actually letting this job work for me too? Like, am I getting the resources I need to have the lifestyle that I want to have? And so that's the whole point of Lazy Girl Jobs, was just to foster conversations like that.
Yeah. And so just to know, a little bit about you, I'm curious if you could just share, sort of briefly, where you grew up and what your family was like, what sort of your experience was. So we just know who's talking to us about this.
Yeah, of course. I've been working since I was 14 years old. I'm 27 now, because I have to, like, not really for fun. There just wasn't really many handouts for me. Raised by a single mom. And so she was a cashier at a grocery store. And so, not to get super, super deep with it, but there was just a lot of financial insecurity. There was a lot of domestic violence that she put up with because of that financial insecurity. So I told myself from a very young age, well, if I just work so freaking hard, I'll never have to be in a toxic relationship like this. And so while that's great to a certain level, it turned into this obsession of like, I have to run away from something via overworking. And so I really hit a wall with this strategy that I had at 23 years old. And that's when I started making content. I was working in the tech industry. And so I grew up for the most part, in Northern Colorado. And I got an awesome tech degree and I got a job straight out of college, and everyone was super happy. This was 2019. This was a great time to get a job in tech. And for the first year, I loved it. I was taking on so many different things. I was making such good progress. I was getting promotions like every 4 months, 6 months, like excelling and exceeding expectations. But what I realized is slowly after a while, no matter what I did, it seemed like I could never get ahead on my workload. There was a lack of resources at the company. And so I took that on as my own project to solve instead of really speaking up and advocating for myself. And I took a concussion and me coming out of work for 2 months for the first time in my life, and since I had been an adult, to like really sit in my room while I was healing from my concussion and be like, what is this strategy? Like, I feel horrible. Like, I do not feel good. I don't even know who I am. I don't have hobbies outside of work. I'm just working. And so that's really where this whole ethos started to really blossom. I just didn't have much of a following yet. I realized every time I was making TikToks, that's where I started. I was making TikToks. Every time I made a TikTok, when I talked about work, it just performed well. And so I was like, hey, everyone has a huge interest. And so my first kind of branding on TikTok was teaching people about non-technical tech jobs out there. Because really what people sometimes have a misconception about is that to work in tech, you have to be just a programmer. And that's not always the case. Even if you do have a tech degree like I do, you don't always have to go straight into just programming. While that's also like an amazing job title as well, and career security. There's many, many other ones as well. And so that's what I started off as. And then, I was really like, hey, there's a bigger conversation I want to talk about, but I was still full time employed at jobs. So I kind of felt this friction where I was like, I really want to take a leap. I really want to talk about things that I think should be fixed on a systemic level in corporate America. I really, really want to encourage people to almost like red pill themselves out of this workaholism. And I just took a leap and decided to do this full time a year and a half ago. And it's been awesome. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities.
Yeah. It's really sort of an interesting jump for somebody like you. I feel like lots of people feel often if they came from, a working class background, or maybe they're the first person in their family who went to college or something like that,
Yeah.
it can feel harder to make a leap and like just not like you're like, oh, I have a good corporate job. Like I can rock the boat. My family's not going to support me if I just like say I'm going to go like do this other thing, or there's this push to like really work hard and make the most of what you're doing. So I wondered if that was sort of something that you had to process, or like, sort of what your thoughts were with your family or things like that.
Yeah. So since I had never received financial support and was immaturely in conversations about financial support at way too young of an age, like I knew how to contribute to rent and how to contribute to like driving my little sister to school when I was a teenager, getting a job so that I could, pay for my lunches, etc. While I was in school. That fear of like, oh, I have no landing, like that, I always had that. So to me, that wasn't anything new. But what I will say, to be real, is like when I did say goodbye to corporate America, it was a weird situation because it wasn't a 2 week notice. So I was there for probably 6 more weeks while I had given my notice, just because of the way that our KPIs worked. It was just quarterly. And so they were like, hey, just stay till the end of Q1, and we'll make this transition pretty slow and easy for everyone. And I would say those 6 weeks were the scariest weeks of my life. I think I used to wake up at like 4 a.m. every day and be like, and my heart was racing. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I feel like I'm going against every single rule and like philosophy that I've been told and that I've also told myself. Um, and I just trusted it in a weird way. I hadn't said lazy girl jobs yet. I didn't really have a plan. I just knew that there was revenue occurring in my business outside of work. And I just knew that if I spent more time in that than my actual job, I could 10x it. And so I just took a big bet on the first month, and I was able to do that. And so from here on out, I've just maintained that. But I would say to make a jump like that, you have to understand your risk tolerance. So for me, I've learned that I can take on a lot of risk. I didn't know that about myself until doing this. But if you're more of a risk adverse person, there's of course like less dramatic ways that you can do this, right? So you can either wait until your business is making the same amount, probably if not more, because obviously there's more expenses in a business than a salary. Find a number that you're looking for monthly and track that benchmark. If you just want to switch to another job, if you do have the means to actually take time off and be off of work for 6 to 9 months, like we're seeing, that's how long it takes to get new jobs these days. If you do have the capacity to do that, do that. If you don't, for whatever reason, that's also not a problem either. And that's where we get into the conversation of like, is embracing some type of lazy girl job ethos so that you get your time and your energy back to then focus on finding a new job opportunity. Is that more worth your time than actually just pushing through at a job that you hate or it's not in alignment? Because if you ignore that, there's an even bigger opportunity cost of not making a change.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's a good segue into the kind of conversation that we're having today about, what to do if you are, in a job that you don't really feel like you can get out of, and it won't pay you more, and you are, feeling kind of trapped by that situation. Like, what are some things that you can do to make it better? And so one of the points was sort of how to maximize your time and your like financial considerations. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah, of course. So I break it down on 3 different pillars that you decide with your career right now. So typically, the traditional advice is you need to learn or earn, and I usually add my third one on there. So I say you either need to learn, earn, or coast. You can do a combination of the three. You can flex in and out of the three. I mean, we're dynamic people. Life is dynamic. Our jobs are dynamic. So it's not a problem if you need to flex around into the three, but really decide like out of those three pillars, what's the most important to you. So the reason that I add coast is because one, we're not robots. Two, life sometimes. So life just happens, right? So whether it's you need to move, big family events, you're in a caregiving role, you're burnt out. Maybe there's mental health situations that you need to address and scale back in your career. Maybe you want to just refresh and then hit it hard that, after the summer. Like there's just so many different reasons. And when I say coast, I don't mean literally don't work and just pretend and do all that. Like that's not what I'm saying. Like obviously do your job, meet the requirements. But maybe that month, that week, that day, whatever, you're not asking your boss for extra work and having that conversation with your boss of like, hey, this is where I'm at. And if that scares you, like thinking about a conversation like that, then maybe that's a good indicator that like coasting is important to you and there is no capacity for you to do it at this job. So what does it look like to try to find a job that, allows you to quote unquote coast a little bit more so you have that flexibility. So looking at learning and earning, right, these more traditional aspects that I still think are obviously very important. You have to think about two things. So do I know enough to earn more in my field? And that can be done by some research, right? You can either find a coffee chat time with someone that's where you want to be in your career and compare and contrast what today, your skill sets, etc., your projects that you've been on, the exposure you've had in your career, and if you're set up for it. Another way, of course, is just testing out in the market. Start applying to jobs. It doesn't hurt to apply to jobs. It's not against the law to apply to jobs, even though you're not fully interested yet. It's just research. And so looking and trying to use the market of like, okay, like, do they say yes? My one caveat I will say to that is you will get a lot of no's even when you were supposed to get a yes in this job market. This job market is a little bit more challenging. So on that case, I would focus on more volume of job applications to push past that because it's always a numbers game. You can also help your situation too by directly connecting with a recruiter, etc. All of these are good conversations to have. And I have a Substack that's coming out tomorrow morning if people want to subscribe to that, where I actually go like very into detail about a guide like this of like really looking at like, are you ready to take on more money? And then, looking at learning, right? So if learning is important to you right now, ask yourself, are there actual opportunities available at your current job that will upskill you to your goals? So sometimes what we see in our careers is we go, our boss will come up to us and call it a learning opportunity, kind of in quotation marks, right? But is it quiet hiring, where quiet hiring means like they're influencing you to take on more work outside of your job scope without a pay increase or a pay conversation? And while it may be a learning opportunity for you that you can leverage, but that's not guaranteed. And so that's a choice that you have to make of if that's even worth it. Or, are there legit learning opportunities? Like, are you seeing these projects and you see the visibility that you can have and they're actually working for you? So it's not a bad thing to take on more work. I don't think that. It's just as long as you have a plan with it, right? So like, are you going to actually leverage this learning that you're taking on and leverage that for a better opportunity internally? And if you can't do it internally, do you have a good understanding and a good game plan of how you're going to leverage it externally? And just being more considerate about where your time's actually going is so important.
Yeah, I wonder when you're deciding whether or not to take on more work, like if that always feels like a choice, and also like, for a lot of people who are high achieving, there's probably like a certain amount of perfectionism or
Yeah.
fear that they won't be affirmed for these things. So I'm wondering if part of the sort of lazy girl job method involves doing some work on, whether you get your affirmation in those places or, why you'll be affirmed at a job or things like that.
Oh my God. That's very insightful. You're speaking my language. I love a conversation like this. So yeah, like that goes back to workaholism. I couldn't agree with you more. It comes back down to why do you work and what feelings, beliefs, external rewards are you chasing in that work? And are there ways that you can fulfill that in your own life? So for people who may not understand what ikigai is a more Eastern philosophy. And so I wish I had like a fun Venn diagram to show you instead of just like making little circles with my hands. But essentially there's a bunch of Venn diagrams, there's a bunch of circles around it, and in the middle it's your purpose, right? So an example of one of the circles is like your skill. What the world needs is another one, etc. And so the combination of all these things is your purpose. And so what I think, especially American and a lot of Western culture has done today, is they've said your job needs to fulfill all of these things. It's your dream job, right? And that's where we have this conversation of, do dream jobs even exist anymore? And if they don't, what is the problem with that? And is there just ways that we can find a job that meets some of our needs, but also practice discernment of prioritizing your personal time to meet those other needs? And so typically when I'm in a place where I want to work a lot, I just caught myself actually like last Friday doing this. It's like, okay, what are you running from? Like what feelings don't you want to feel right now, or what feelings do you wish you could feel, but for whatever reason you're trying to seek it at work? And so that's where a level of discernment comes in that I believe is a really, really powerful conversation. That's going to be a huge chapter in my book that will come out next year.
Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot, and I think that a lot of people really, really relate to this idea of like, is my dream job even out there anymore? Like, was it ever? And I think we're really socialized, especially younger generations. We're told by our parents, you can do anything that you want. You should choose something you're passionate about. You go to college, that's what you do it for. And then you get out into the job market and you're like, does this thing even exist anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it's really helpful to, like, like just think about the fact that it doesn't have to come from your job all the time, and I wonder if too you think that it is even realistic for people to try to look for like other passion project or something like that, their passion job. Like, is that something that you think is like a worthwhile pursuit at this point? Like, should you get paid money to do the thing that you're passionate about? Like, is that a thing that you should think is even really worth doing all the time?
Yes, I definitely do believe that. So that's something that I try to be very clear with because what the opposite of what you're talking about is nihilism. So it's this idea of why even bother, why even do anything if there's no passion available. And that's something that I'm completely against. Like, that is not something that I want to make cool. That is not something that I think will elevate anyone. I do think that telling people that they'll never find their purpose is inhumane. And so that distinction is just super important. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So you can find purpose in your job. Here's the thing though. So there's this, apologies for my language because the book title is a foul name, but there's a book called Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. It's amazing. I quoted it at my TEDx talk. I am a huge fan of him. He unfortunately passed in 2020, but he talks about how we came up with a lot of meaningless work to create essentially meaningless jobs, which then created meaningless careers. And so he goes through the entire book of defining what even meaningless means, the implications that has on a personal level and a societal level, et cetera. And so what happens is when we prioritize busyness over productivity, I firmly believe that is the main driver for this feeling that we get sometimes of like, there's no passion in my job, like there's no purpose. And that makes sense because like you're actually doing something every day that is considered meaningless, both to the company itself, to you, and to the world. And so that would make a lot of sense. And so that's why I talk about lazy girl jobs, because it's like when we focus on what's actually moving the needle in our careers and ignoring the rest, or at least maybe not ignoring it, but reassessing it and seeing if it's worth our time and if it's worth if it's giving us the return on our investment that we want. When we do that, we do start to simplify our jobs a lot more, and we get to simplify our purpose and simplify why we're doing what we're doing. Now, again, like I said earlier, if your job is not fulfilling every single one of your passions and purpose, et cetera, that's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, I randomly got certified to become a yoga teacher. I've never taught for money in my life. I just did it to better my practice during my lazy girl job. It was just like, oh, this, I had felt a calling to it, and in the middle of my career, and I was like, I don't know, let me try this out. And it's like, just being able to normalize that type of exploration, I think, is super important. but we can't do it if we're spending 60 hours at our job doing work that could be automated, or we could have a conversation with our boss about maybe changing our workload to something that's more meaningful, etc. So that's a huge conversation. And I think too, I think it's important that you brought up the dream job conversation, especially from our parents, because it is a big almost like conditioning that's been put on us with millennials especially. So technically I'm a Gen Z, but I'm 27. I never ate Tide Pods. I never grew up with iPods, etc. So I'm a little bit in between. And so for me, I have grown up with a lot of that millennial conditioning of like, always write a thank you note, always do these things, etc. with your job, like always be grateful, a job is a job, etc. Don't complain, things like that, where it's like, hey, maybe we're not complaining, but we're at least just assessing if this job is actually letting us up or not. And you can also monetize things on the side if your employee agreement allows it. Always look at your employee agreement. I am not legal advice, but if you can always monetize your hobbies and passions elsewhere. So that's where I talk a lot about the idea of a career portfolio. I think that will be huge in the coming years, where people are, hey, I'm an account manager over here or project manager at this company. And I also teach Pilates or whatever. And I also do this. Like, I think that we'll be able to have more of a flexible understanding and approach to monetizing a lot of different parts of ourselves and not just centering ourselves around one 9 to 5.
Yeah, I saw something that you said about how to use ChatGPT to put in all of the things that you've ever done and ask them like, what else would I be qualified for? I wonder if you could talk about that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so I teach people a lot on AI. I think that it's super important, and so of course there's ethical ways to use AI, and you don't have to share your personal information like PII, things like that. So I would just want to make that very clear. You also do not need to add company information to things as well. You can keep sensitive company information out of things. Keep it super vague when you're prompting, etc. But ChatGPT kind of is replacing career coaches. Like I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, this is a way that we can really teach, like someone like my audience how to fish in our career. So any little step where we're running into issues of like, how do I even leverage all the expertise I have, or something even trivial as like, my boss is mad at me for this one thing I screwed up. Like, can you help me with this? Like, ChatGPT can help with everything. It's so interesting. And so I actually created a voice guide that went live this summer, which is super exciting. And I walk you through the entire process. It's called Autopilot 9 to 5. And so I found all these different ways to put tasks that we do over and over and over again on autopilot. So even like taking notes at meetings, even responding to emails that we have to do over and over again, reports, etc. Many things can be automated these days, which is super exciting. You can even automate your job search process, right? So anything from taking it from step one of like your game plan, your career plan, ideating the actual job that you're going for, to, optimizing your resume, to optimizing your LinkedIn, to practicing for interviews, to, negotiating and actually looking at, hey, these are my benefits, this is my salary, this is my cost of living, etc. Like, am I actually getting what I'm worth in this? And asking ChatGPT or any other AI prompter like you.com to help you with that. It's so life changing.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like, speaking of that, and sort of returning to our original topic, like, if you are feeling underpaid and undervalued in your job right now, what is like the first thing that you should do? Should you assess whether that's actually the case with some of the methods that you just mentioned? And then once you find out and you are, then what should you do?
Yeah, I love this question. So pay is tricky. Our finances are still considered taboo, right? It's weird. No one sends screenshots of what's in our bank accounts. No one talks about salaries, etc. Like, it's still pretty new. But typically, always looking at your state laws, etc. But typically, you can talk about your pay to coworkers. And so what I always did when I was in corporate America, because I was typically either the only female on the team or of a few, because I worked in tech, I always wanted to make sure that I had a trusted male friend that I could talk to about pay and really compare. Someone that I started with, someone where we have both the same degree, started at the same time, working on the same things. I think it's super, super important to just find a trusted person that you can facilitate conversations like that. Then from there, right, you learn a lot. Pay transparency is super, super important. Of course, obviously, there's tools out there that can help you. If you don't want to have the conversation of your actual coworkers, you can always look at things like Glassdoor. There's levels at FYI, etc. There's so many different ones out there. You can just do a quick Google search and see. So that's where you do your own personal research. The second part to it is actually being able to analyze, are you making money or not? So what a lot of times we don't talk about until very recently, we have cost of living adjustments, COLA. Typically, if your salary increase did not outperform inflation, you're losing money, or it's just the cost of living increase and it's not necessarily a salary raise. So I think it's super, super important to look at the statistics of where you live and actually see how much your cost of living has increased and if your salary is being competitive with that. Now, if it's not being competitive with that, that doesn't mean throw your hands up in the air and be like, why? Like, why should I even bother? Like, why should I even work? Like, it's not to create this type of bitterness. It's just more information for you to make a decision. So then it's time to look at performance reviews, right? I used to think that performance reviews can only happen once a year because that's when they're planned. And then I learned that people literally just ask for promotions and raises all the time, and they get no's a lot, but sometimes they get yeses, and that's, I think, amazing. So instead of looking at it as, oh, I have to wait till my next performance review, are you at a place with your boss where you can schedule like a 6-month check-in? Maybe you don't get the promotion or the raise right there, but you know what they're expecting out of you and you have more clarity on that. I think it's super, super important to loop your employer in on your career goals and your financial goals. That's what you're gaining out of this. And so normalizing that conversation is important too. So also, if you run into this issue, right? So say you're someone and you're like in this chat and you're like, I've been doing this for 3 years. I've gotten absolutely no salary raise. I've done everything that you just said right here, right now. That looks like it's not a good fit anymore. And that's okay too. So what we have to do is we have to start working with recruiters to find what is the market rate for our skills today. And so how you increase I'm just reading the chat in here. How you increase your value is being able to articulate one thing. It's actually not anything to do with like your experience level. In my opinion, it has absolutely nothing to do with a lot of factors. It's essentially just creating more value in your solution and also predicated off of the value of the problems that you're going to be solving at this job. So of course, obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into your salary. Some of them are cost of living. Some of them are third-party services that the employer will use to, evaluate job codes, et cetera. But there's also a level of negotiation where if you, especially in job interviews, like say you're job hopping instead of actually trying to get an internal raise, you can clearly define the problem that you are going to solve and paint the narrative of how much of a pain point, both on a financial and a time-wise, this is for the company, and also explain how you can fix it, your value goes up immensely. Because sometimes when we look at these problems that we're supposed to solve in our job, when recruiters especially are writing the job scope for these jobs, we may overlook the severity of these problems. So if you can tell a story of like how big this problem is and how much of a net negative this is and how much you understand to fix it, your value goes up immensely. And I have a free guide. It's called the Lazy Girl Brag Book. And so I have a place where you can actually keep in track like all of your achievements that you've ever done in your career. There's prompts at the bottom, and it will teach you how to use AI to make a transcript, like a script almost, of what I'm saying here, of like actually leveraging everything that you've done in the past and making yourself not seem more like you are valuable. It's just being able to actually articulate it in a way where you can articulate that value. Because my last thought on this is, we're taught a lot when we want to make more money, we need to take on more work. That could be the case in some cases. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where if you don't know enough and you're realizing that you don't have the skills yet, that's okay. Maybe you just need to take on more work and take on more projects. But a lot of times we have already done a lot of the things. We just forget because we're not keeping track of it. And so if you're able to find a way to take what you've already done and leverage it as a higher ticket problem, just a nudge above ahead of what you're doing, bingo.
Yeah, it's really smart. And I wanted to just return briefly to what you were talking about transparency, about pay. And, whether you think that that is a conversation that you can have with higher ups, whether it should be, I mean, I guess there's a question of whether it should be normalized, then there's a question of whether it is and whether you'll be penalized for, pursuing this
Yeah.
conversation. But, how do you go about that if you don't really have a coworker at your job that is maybe on your level or that you feel comfortable asking? Can you ask your boss, like, what is the way to go about that conversation, and why do you think it hasn't been normalized to this point, and how is it changing?
Oh, that's a big conversation. So the reason that it's not normalized is because obviously more information allows you to make better decisions. And so an employer, if they're a regular employer where they're just thinking about the business interest, they actually don't gain anything on a monetary level if you understand what everyone else is making and vice versa. But not every employer is like that, right? There's great companies to work for. There's great companies that empower conversations like this. Another thing too is your job title. Here, how do I say this? Like your teammate may not have the same exact qualifications as you. So sometimes your teammate may be making 15K more than you because they're supposed to. And so there's also a level of that you need to understand too is, are we even matching up in sync? Like, do we actually even have the same expertise level? And is this even a good comparison to have? So yeah, it's not always, it won't always be the case where you can look at the coworker next to you and get the information that you need. And so that's why I was talking about earlier, like things like Glassdoor, things like levels.fyi, things like that is super important. Reddit is great too because everyone's anonymous. So people typically are a little bit more authentic on many things, but you can use it for job transparency as well. I'm a big fan of r/anti-work, hence that's actually where my brand name came from. I used to react to stories about that were posted on r/anti-work. But there's more focused subreddits that you can always go to as well. So I do think it's important to talk there. Fishbowls actually came out, sorry, Glassdoor actually came out with an app called Fishbowls. And so there you can actually join bowls bowls are kind of like interests or categories that are related to your career. And you can have anonymous conversations about what you're getting paid, what company you work for, etc. There's also a level two of let's get the analytical stuff out of this. Are you paying your bills? If your bills aren't paid, like you have to leave regardless. So it doesn't matter. There comes to a point where it's like, even if everyone's making the same amount and your bills are and your cost of living, even though you're living under your means and you are, trying to just live a life and you're not being paid correctly, they can't afford 40 hours a week from you. So there's this other conversation of like, do you need to find another job? And I'm not laughing at it like this is trivial. I'm laughing at this of like, this is so real. Like if your full-time job is not paying your cost of living, we gotta focus on that first. And so yeah, pay is a huge, huge conversation. Did I miss any little like more sub question that you asked on that?
Oh, just in terms of like normalizing it, like normalizing the
Mm-hmm.
conversation about transparency. Like, did you try having those conversations? Like when you were in your jobs, and how did they go? And yeah, I don't know what just generally, because I'm sure a lot of people might be watching this and be like, I don't know I can't have that conversation.
Yeah, it definitely goes with just asking a question for sure. You can also ask for permission in the beginning. So you can ask and make sure that it's consensual on both sides that you're sharing. Of course, yes, some people just don't want to share, and for whatever reason, it's important to respect that. It's scary. It's super weird. So I'm not going to sit here and say like it's totally fine and you should be talking about your job. This is another opportunity where you can explain to ChatGPT, maybe not give it the company name and the salary you're actually making, but give it a good context of what's going on and say, hey, I'm super nervous. How do I gain the confidence to actually say this to a coworker? How do I gauge that this coworker and the relationship that I have is at a point where I can't ask for this? Rapport is super important, and being able to have trust with coworkers is super important. Now, if you work in a situation where it's quite competitive, there's absolutely no way that you could have any type of trust like this to have conversations like this. Again, we go back to the external research phase. You probably won't be able to have a conversation like that. You could also look at HR resources or any type of resources that your employer provides. You might be surprised sometimes about how helpful they can be. HR really is there for you. So that's important too. Um, but yeah, just to share on a personal level, I mean, it does feel weird. It's super awkward. I thought it was awkward every single time. But especially after you share, it just brings more clarity and it takes away from these what ifs.
Yeah, which are the worst. Yeah, totally. The unknown is always
Hmm.
inducing. So yeah, I guess my last question is just kind of very general, like baby steps. If somebody is, just in a job, they're like, maybe it's actually really hard to imagine doing, making this job a lazy girl job. Maybe it's just like, it's really hard. It's a lot of work. They don't know how to pull back on the hours. What would you, but they really want this, they want to get out of it. What would you suggest are like the first little things that they should do?
Yeah, so I break down autonomy into FIST. I call it FIST. So there's what you're really looking for is autonomy, right? So work life balance is super awesome, but work life balance is more of this conversation of, you have a dentist appointment. You don't have to take a half day. You can just take an extra long lunch and then we'll make up those times, on the back end. Or, you have to pick up your kids from school. That's okay. Just log back in at 7 a.m. Like that's not actually work life balance. It's still this quota of hours worked. There's not a lot of life around it. They're just being more flexible so that you don't take PTO because then they're paying you and they're out of work. And so I think that autonomy is super important. So I should have just prefaced that in the beginning before getting into it. But how I define autonomy and break it down is financial, ideological, socially, who you're hanging out with, and your time. So to take it back on the first one, financial, are you getting the resources that you need to live the life that you want? Do you feel like you're being paid fairly, which is a huge conversation we've had today. Ideologically is another conversation that we had kind of in the first half of this of like, why are you working? And are there any types of red flags as to why you are working that may need to be recalibrated away from the external rewards of work? And can you find that in a more fulfilling way, either in your relationships, um, personal life, reading a book? I mean, I read fiction books now. That's a huge healing journey that I went on because I told myself, like, especially when I was corporate America, any extra hours that I have outside of work, like it's got to be towards personal improvement, and not that I'm saying fictional books aren't personal improvement, but it was like I was still trying to find every little ounce of my time to go towards this like busyness mentality. And so looking at that of like, hey, are you dabbling in some of these things and how can we pull that back? And it may not happen today. It may not happen tomorrow. It's a lifelong journey of unraveling of what feels good for you, right? And then there's the social aspect of things. So are you around people that work with you and are aligned with you? Like, are you with people where like they have the life that you want and you respect them, etc.? Like that is something that is going to help you in many different avenues beyond just like getting that next job title, but you're going to learn a lot from them. Um, there's a lot of employers out there where they want to go back into the office and they want to be together. Of course, there's a lot of employers, there's a lot of companies where they don't want to go back in the office. But the ones that do, it's like there's something in that where it's like, hey, I feel I do better when I'm with these people. And so is there any ways like that where we can look at your actual social life at work and decide, is it lighting you up or not? And if it's not, do we dial that back a little bit? Maybe just focus on work a little bit and we still talk to decision holders and we still are a team player in appropriate scenarios. We're not being jerks. But do we just kind of pull back on that and find friends elsewhere? We spend a lot of time together, and so at the office, and so it's just important that we audit the relationships that we have at work and see if they're actually lighting us up. And then there's your time, right? So you kind of focus on this in the beginning of the question, like, what if you don't have enough time? I always think about automating, delegating, or negating. So can you automate the thing? Can you delegate the thing? Or can you negate the thing? So completely ignore it or have a conversation with your boss of taking it off your workload. If you take that 3-step model, I bet you there's some things that you can take out and at least reduce your work from, 62 hours that you're working to 59, right? And like maybe that's the win that you're celebrating this week. And so this is like climbing a mountain. and that's why I never run out of content ideas. That's why I continue to do what I do, because this is a crazy conversation. And jobs in our life, like I said in the beginning of this, are dynamic. Like sometimes our life is super lazy almost. Like our life really doesn't need much from us. We can pour in more to our jobs. Sometimes it's the other way around. And so we just have to understand that this is all fluid, and the plan that we had yesterday or the year before or 20 years ago may not work today, and that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Well, this conversation has been so great and so helpful. I'm sure for many people. I don't know if you have anything sort of that you specifically wanted to say that we didn't touch on, but I want to see.
Oh, I'm so grateful for that. I appreciate it. Let me think. Like I said in the beginning of this, a big deep dive of what we talked about today will be live on my Substack tomorrow. So if you don't know what Substack is, it's a very similar experience to the Entrepreneur Plus, where there's articles that I post that I write, and there's the free side, there's the paid side, and then we have the founding members as well, and they get a 30-minute Q&A from me one-on-one every year. So that's exciting. And so feel free to join me over there to just further this conversation. And then, of course, I have my social media as well, but that's everywhere. That's tagged in my entrepreneur bio, things like that. So you can always find me over there. But I definitely appreciate this conversation today. Financial literacy, transparency, etc., is super important. And I just want to thank Entrepreneur for allowing me, just elevating this conversation. I really respect it.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note, with Entrepreneur Plus, who you are a writer for, if you would like more content from Gabrielle, and you are not yet a subscriber, you are going to want to take advantage of this exclusive offer. You can get your first month for free with the code ONEFREE, capital FREE. Click on the link in the chat or visit entrepreneur.com to subscribe now. As a subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive tips and strategies from Gabrielle and our host of other experts. Plus, you will unlock all member benefits. Subscribe now with code ONEFREE, capital free. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a really great conversation.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And just to reiterate, those are exclusive articles. They don't go anywhere else. So they only live on Entrepreneur.
Yes. So that is a gold mine for you waiting to happen with this exclusive. Okay. All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope the weather is sunny in Colorado. It always is. So talk to you later.
Bye.